Okay, so welcome everybody. We're just going to head off into another edition of the Director's Cut. This first little bit is a talk, and then, of course, like I said, we'll have questions and hopefully some answers. The first thing is I wanted to do a talk on a few topics around how clients are, what kind of client care there is, and issues around people in addiction. I didn't get the full thing finished that I wanted to finish, so I'm going to do an older talk that I have. This talk is basically on the course of recovery. Now, this is mainly about sex addiction, but this course of recovery actually applies to different forms of recovery. So you can look at it from a more general standpoint if that's something you want to look at for today. You can kind of glean from this some of your own uh, conclusions about healing, even from various issues. So even though I'm gonna present it on what comes from a workbook called Recovery Zone, and it's mostly focused on sexual addiction. Has a more universal application if you look at it that way. All right. So now the PowerPoint didn't work out quite like I wanted to, so I'm going to talk to you as I read the PowerPoint or the notes that I have. The first thing is stages of recovery. There are 6 stages of recovery that Dr. Patrick Carnes outlines, and I'm just going to go over them briefly with you. The first is what we call the pre-discovery or the developing stage. This particular stage is one, if we take it from a partner standpoint, is where they knew something was wrong, but they didn't quite understand what exactly is wrong. And as they're waiting, trying to figure out what the heck is happening in our relationship, the secret behaviors continued and probably got worse. So this is what we call the developing stage. It reaches another point called the crisis or decision-making stage. Now, for the crisis, it's because there's some form of discovery. The discovery is that there have been behaviors that have been happening all along that were not well known or known at all, and it's a crisis in the relationship. Sometimes this can happen in an individual who's not in a relationship, where they just reach a fed up point and they're like, I can't be doing this anymore. The violations against my own person, and they realize that. But for the most part, it's in a relationship and the discovery happens and they realize like the partner is devastated. And so that's just something to realize is the crisis, and then the decision usually has to be made, go and get help or not get help. It's also for the partner an information gathering stage. It's like, okay, now I'm going to piece everything together. And this lasts a very long time. So I'm just going to show you just a little bit of the screen that I'm talking from here. And hopefully you can see this in a second. And so basically you got developing stage, the crisis decision-making stage, and that you can see that it lasts a certain amount of months and it continues on. The next phase is shock stage. So let me talk to you a bit about shock. Shock happens for both the person with the addiction and the partner. Shock is when you can't sort of believe your reality is actually what it is. And so there's a little bit of disbelief, there's a little bit of denial, there's also just coming to terms with. And so for the person with the addiction, the coming to terms with is actually a real steep climb. It's going to lead into the next phase, which has to do with grief, because there's just a realization of how much hold this behavior actually had. And to make sense of that, I want to share with you a little bit about how the addicted mind works. Most addicted minds work in a form of compartmentalization. Compartmentalization is sticking everything into its own categories and keeping firm walls in between them so that you don't get to see what the other compartment holds. And so there's a lot of inner blindness, a lot of blind spots. When the behavior's stopped and everything's starting to come out and you're starting to piece together all these disparate parts, it's a bit of a shock. It's a shock even to the person who is doing the behaviors, to the depth and levels and so on that they were actually involved with those behaviors. And this shock system can last a very long time, many, many months, maybe even years. For partners, it can be, for some, a lifetime. And that's unfortunate. Those are the partners who don't get better, but who stay stuck. They stay stuck in shock. So oftentimes, it's something that is part of a denial system, but it's always something of a shock to have discovery. But they stay in shock even as the partner with the addiction moves along and progresses. So both for the person with the addiction and the partner, shock can be a very devastating phase that they go through. But as they break through the denial and as they come to an acceptance, the shock starts to lift. Okay. So next stage, as I mentioned, is grief. Grief is a stage of really feeling the loss. Now, for the person with the addiction, grief is a real regret, a regret of all the secretive behaviors that were done, a regret of the moral lines that were crossed, a regret of the lost time, lost opportunities, maybe failure and advancement in their career, maybe lost money, that kind of stuff. The grief stage it can be pretty steep for some. And for the partner, grief is a lot about feeling that they've lived a false life up to this point, or at least during the phase they were with their partner. So for a partner going through grief, it's the marriage that I thought I had but never had. And for some partners, they get past shock, but they can't get past grief. Grief sticks to them. It's a constant regret, and you're in this kind of system where you're losing the present to mourn the past. So I'll say that again. You're losing the present to mourn the past. And that's what we usually try to show to people in grief, is that they're in a position where they are losing out more because they're adding to. It's almost like they took out a loan and the interest rate's too high and they keep paying the interest and they're just getting more and more in debt nonetheless. It's a little bit like that, except instead of money debt, it's grief. And they're grieving over the loss that they had of their relationship, but rather than being able to, say, move on in the present and start to live life today differently, they're losing out on today to pay for yesterday's loss. So grief can be a real stickler for partners as well as the person with addiction. Overlapping grief and moving on to its own stage is repair. Repair is a stage where they actually start to heal the relationship. They're going back and they're being honest with everything that's happened. They're repairing what was broken through secret sexual or hidden behaviors and the trauma breach, the trust breach that it brought and the trauma that occurred. They're beginning to repair the relationship, which also means that there's more sobriety and real recovery that's beginning in the person with the addiction. And there's actual recovery from the trauma levels and typical trauma behaviors that the partner goes through. So repair can last a good number of years, not just months, but usually it's encapsulated in things where the couple is really beginning to work on each other as a couple. So it's moving away from more of the individual work and being more centered on the couple work. And it leads nicely into the final stage, which is the growth stage. Growth stage is pretty much for the rest of your life, but Carnes' map that he puts together is approximately a 5-year map. In the last 2-3 years of it is the growth stage. And that's because you've got sufficient recovery and trauma reduction so that both the individuals and them as a couple can really start to work on their own healing, and beyond healing, development of character. So when I say development of character, what I mean is that they're really discovering who they are and they're living out of their true identity of who they are. And in that living out of that identity, they are growing. They're growing as a person and as a couple. So those are the basic stages: developing stage, crisis or decision-making stage, shock stage, grief stage, repair stage, and growth stage. Right now, let me just encapsulate this with just a summary. The main thing that you're looking for in understanding this, and this again, you can generalize this and apply this to a lot of other issues. You would just change the time frames around it. Is that most people do not truly appreciate the level of their problems until they've seen that the problem is too much. Now, that's a tipping point. When a person comes to therapy about any other issue and they say, I just don't know what to do with this problem anymore, that's coming to the realization it's too much. When they realize it's too much, they get to finally take time to appraise it for, well, how much is too much? And they really start to appreciate just the complexity and the difficulties that that problem arises for them. When they get to that stage, there's a little bit of wanting to give up. At first, they were motivated when they found out more about how much damage is really there and how much struggle it's going to take to get out of it. There's a disheartening element, and they kind of want to give up. They also go into that mourning or grief stage. And after that kind of phase, when they start to gain some momentum, then they're moving into feeling they're getting better, feeling they're getting somewhere, and then eventually they lead into real growth. So even when we apply this to a general struggle, you can see how the concept makes the same sense, right? So whether you're a person who's personally going through sexual addiction, and trying to recover from that, or you're a partner of, or you're actually just applying this to some other general struggle that you might have in your life, I hope you understand that this concept, that there are stages and that the stages overlap each other as they progress, is a very important concept. One last thing. Even though it presents linearly, it seems like a straight line. There is a cyclical nature to this. I often refer to things in recovery as not being a staircase or a step ladder, but rather as being dance steps on the floor. You know those silhouetted soles of the feet, and you kind of put the stickers down and you put them in the position of where your feet are supposed to go. And as you're stepping onto those silhouettes of the footsteps, you're actually making the moves necessary to do a dance move. And you do it over and over and over again until you don't need the silhouettes to tell you what to do anymore. And that's more what recovery is like. Recovery is that ability to eventually do the dance steps by memorization, by rote, by instinct almost, by second nature. And recovery there has this impact of lasting because it's become the new habit. So a talk I'll give another time, but this is sort of lead into that, is healing is about building new behaviors, not getting rid of old behaviors. So that's another talk, but just briefly, healing is about building new behaviors, not about getting rid of old behaviors. And so you can see that in the whole growth department, right? That the first part is dealing with the old behaviors, realizing what they were, being in shock over it, being in grief over what was lost, and then repairing, healing, and moving into growth. When you see that sort of standard, you realize that the real growth and everything that needed to happen didn't happen until the new behaviors were begun. So just a reminder for any psychological therapy that you might be in. Sometimes the earliest stage has the most, appearing change, but the real depth, the real growth of healing happens for people later on. And unfortunately, some people don't stick it out. They make temporary change, and then it turns into some success, and they quit. Unfortunately, sometimes for those people, they end up having to come back to therapy, right? Because it doesn't stick. But if you understand the model I talked about today, you can see that real change in the brain takes years. Not that you're in therapy the whole time, but it does take years. And so stage after stage, you have to stay consistent and not rest on your laurels. You have to keep going. And that's just an encouragement to you guys, whatever you're coming to here for, to appreciate that when you started to work on your issues, if you knew how much work it would take, I don't believe you would have done the work. Thankfully, you were ignorant. You didn't fully appreciate how much work it takes. And so you were willing to start the journey. But in starting the journey, you became invested in the journey. Being invested in the journey, you wanted to continue the journey. Continuing the journey, you began to have change. Having more change meant more repair, more healing, and then more growth. So somehow, if the system works, it's part of the way our brain works. Be grateful that you didn't fully know how much work it would take when you started. But hopefully now you're in a stage when it will lead to appreciation for the hero that a person is in undergoing a healing journey. And I really wish that you guys have a successful therapeutic journey, whether you're just beginning one or you've been in one for a while. And hopefully today, the little discussion helped. So I'm going to turn it over to you for questions now. The questions happen through the chat feature. So please do pull up your chat feature. If you want to be completely anonymous, you can change the everyone tab to just my name. But you can also, if you feel free writing the question so everyone can read it, you can do that as well. The first set of questions I'm going to ask you guys is anything about the topic I just presented on. So take care of that first. And after that phase is over, I'll open it up to general questions. So if you're interested in asking a question, type it away right now. If you're trying to formulate the question, do an ellipsum or 3 dots and press enter, and then I'll know you're working on asking a question. Okay. All right. So someone is making a comment of thanking for the talk. Really interesting, informative. Just wondering if it's possible to get a copy of Karn's picture he showed. Yeah, it's in a workbook. So I'm just going to show you. Even though I was working off of an ITAP chart PDF, no, PowerPoint, I think it was an ITAP PowerPoint. This here is in the book. So you see these stages here? The developing stage, the crisis decision, shock, grief, repair, growth. That's on page 7 of the recovery zone. So you can get it from that. You can also, if you want to see a picture of it online, you can type in the course of recovery over time, Patrick Carnes. The course of recovery over time, Patrick Carnes, and there should be some PDFs or something on that. So thank you, Brad. Anyone else? Is anybody shocked that the process could take up to 5 years? The first stage, developing stage, is 2 years. A crisis can be from 1 day to 3 months or more. Shock stage can be about 8, 9 months. Grief stage, another 4 to 9 months. Repair stage can take a year to 3 years, and growth stage is about 2 years and beyond. So anybody shocked that Carnes' model says it takes about 5 years to turn your brain around? Oh, someone's shocked. Well, when you're in the process long enough. Oh, there's a good comment. So Alex is saying, especially nowadays when you expect things to come fast, just like ordering online. That's right. I mean, one thing to really think about with this is, especially with addiction, it takes a long time to actually get an addiction. And it can be, there are the rare cases of the instant addiction. And what I mean by that is you had an imprinting experience, the contact with that experience and the neurochemical that element of it just completely blew your mind, almost literally. And it just stuck with you so strong that you had to keep returning to that again and again. That would be like an instant addiction. For a lot of people, it's an exploration, turns into a bit of a habit, turns into a compulsion, turns into an addiction. So through repetition and time and intensity, it develops over whatever, weeks, months, years, often years. So how do we expect to just suddenly turn that off and completely change that around in just a couple days, a couple meetings, you know, meeting a therapist once a month for 5 months? Like, that is not going to turn this around. So yeah, but our instincts, especially if you are an addict, is like, I want my easy button, I want to press it, and I want it now. So I just really want to encourage you to think about to encourage people who to maybe tell you, hey, this seemingly takes forever, and say to them, yeah, it took a very long time to get into the problem, it takes a long time to get out, right? Like, if you dig a hole, you're one shoveling at a time, one shovel load at a time. You're going to get pretty deep after a long, long time. Well, to fill that hole back in, it's going to take one shovel at a time over a long, long period of time before you get yourself out. Good. Okay, any other questions on the topic before we turn? Oh, good. There's another question. Can you be in multiple stages at the same time? Alex, absolutely. That's sort of the emphasis of the chart. I'm just going to show it to you again because I don't have it up on my computer. But if you see the overlap between the stages, they do all, there's a stage where you have 3 of them at the same time. You're still in crisis, decision, and shock and grief pretty much at the same time. Or you're still in shock, grief, and repair all at the same time. So just as an example, right along here, these 3 stages all overlap, right? So that absolutely can happen. Okay, good. Well, yeah, so there's also a question here about other addictions. So that's a good topic for another time, Brad, but I will mention something here. There is something called addiction interaction disorder, okay, AID, and that Carnes coined that term. It has a lot to do with how one type of addiction can interplay with another type of addiction. So there's a lot of the time when we're dealing with people with what we call the presenting problem. They're coming in, say, with sexual addiction, and we say, okay, that's the presenting problem. It's not the only problem, but it's the one causing the real issues right now. So we actually address that issue up front, kind of like a symptom management, bringing down the inflammation from the wound. When we do that, that doesn't mean that there aren't other issues going on. And in fact, sometimes the other issues could be even more severe or become more severe. For instance, again, this is a different talk, but very briefly, I'll say a person who needs to have a few drinks before they go and get sexual is combining potentially 2 addictions. Maybe they have a drinking problem and they have a sex addiction problem. So that can be one issue. or the person, you know, in those old movies, they smoke a cigarette after having sex type of thing, you know, like there becomes a combination. Or there's a substitution kind where, you know, I give up acting out sexually, but then I eat the fridge, you know, so it's like you're giving up one and you're replacing it fully with another type of compulsion or addiction. Anyway, there's a whole talk I can give on that. If you're interested, let me know. But just to mention, there is a overlap where you can be at repair and growth stage on your sex addiction, but just be beginning your money disorders stuff. You're at crisis decision stage on, say, your money disordered issues, or food issues or something like that. So that does happen. Okay, wonderful. All right. Let's open it up. You can ask more questions on this topic if it comes up for you, or on any other topic, like why did you tune in today? You know, you probably came in with an idea to ask the director something. If you have a question related to psychotherapy in any way, feel free to ask it, and I'll do my best to answer it. So Alex is asking, are there different talks each week? Yes, there's different talks. I can't say they're all good. I do my best. But we sometimes, oftentimes I'll have a good PowerPoint to go with the talk. Sometimes I don't. There are different talks every week. We have a list of topics to go over. The only thing is we're kind of spitballing it here, which topic goes next. We don't got the full itinerary set out yet. So that will be hopefully set out and people will be informed about that. But right now we're just going along with a kind of a pull it out of the hat topic, and I prepare on that for the next week. So there's a talk every week. Now the talks are normally, like I said, 15 or 20 minutes. I think I stuck mostly to that today. And then the Q&A happens. And sometimes the Q&A lasts 10 minutes, and sometimes it takes us all the way to the end of the hour. So we end up having 30 or more minutes of questions and answers. But there is a talk every week, yes. Are there groups either at Whitestone or in the community for women struggling with sexual addictions? Very good question. I tell you what, it's probably the most underserved segment of the population. On my list of things is female porn use. There's a great author in that category called Jessica Harris. Jessica Harris is a great speaker as well on this topic. I actually presented in a workshop where she was a speaker as well, and I recommend her books, Jessica Harris. But the idea behind it, are there specific groups for it? No. In our clinic, we've tried several times. We had a group once. That group had only 3 members, and it didn't fully last because a group of 3 is not a stable group. As you know, if people don't show up at a meeting, it suddenly becomes a couple session, or sometimes just one person shows up. That's not good. So usually you need about 5 or so people to make a group work. And we've just have not had 5 at the same time. But it's a dream of mine that in Whitestone, we would be eventually at a stage where we could run a group exclusively for women. Now, women have all the same templates as men, and this is another talk, so I won't go into a deep dive on this, but if you look at the top of an umbrella and you divide it into 20 sections, 20 triangles, okay, you would say that those are all templates. Women could have all the same templates as men, but they tend to be more on the love addiction template than the others, where porn and love addiction are 2 of the biggest ones. For men, it's porn and sometimes the chase, or I think they call it the conqueror template. But paying for sex, women don't usually appear on that one. Selling it, they do, right? But so basically, I want us to have something for women in the Whitestone Clinic, specifically struggling with love and sex addiction. We just need 4 or 5 of them show up at the same time. And what we usually have is any given month, we have 2 or so clients of that nature. But they've phased out by the time the other ones have phased in, and we don't have the overlap at the same time. Or if we do have the overlap, one person's far along in their journey, and starting a new group for them makes no sense. So that's been our problem all along. As far as the SA groups go, you would have to form your own. So that sounds like a lot, but most of the groups are mixed gender, and that's a little challenging for some women. What you do is you would call, say, SA or SAA or SLAA. Those are the 3 big ones in Ottawa. Now it's online, so it almost doesn't matter, but you would go to their website, check them out, see if they have a women's only group online, start there. If they don't have women's only group online, you go to their headquarters and you ask for the resources to set up a group. So it's possible, but you have to do the research. Okay, we had a question up a little higher. Can we view previous talks? Yes, these are recorded, but the problem we're having is Zoom recording getting translated into something we can put on our website. We have about 3 talks in backup right now that just haven't been put up yet. It's also reliant on the schedule of all the changes we're doing on our website. So I predict at some point in May, we should have about 5 or 6 talks up on the website, but we just don't have them up yet, okay? Okay, somebody mentioned, thank you. Somebody mentioned to me in a direct message that there might be a women's only SAA meeting on Friday evenings. So yes, so look into that. Like I said, go onto the SAA website and inquire about that. Of course, things could change when things return back to normal. But if you go to saaottawa.org, that's what Brad just kind of put up, that could be helpful to find that meeting. Okay. Good. See, you're helping each other. I love it. That's great. Other questions? It can be about any psychological topic as well. Don't feel you're restrained to addiction if you don't feel like only talking about that, which is fine if you do, but just letting you know. Okay, so give me 3 dots if you still have a question. Otherwise, we'll wrap this thing up a little early. Oh, there we go. Waiting on one more question. Okay, there's another question here. Are there therapists at Whitestone who offer internal family systems or parts work for sex addictions? Well, listen, sex addiction treatment is complex. Like, you can use almost any therapeutic model to approach it. However, we focus on a core of task-centered therapy. So task therapy that is about accomplishing certain goals and working along. It's sort of like alongside the 12 steps, but you don't technically have to do the 12 steps. And so that has to be in it. Now, all of us do that work here because we use workbooks that also utilize task-centered therapy. However, the different approaches that you might have in an individual session are dependent on the therapist, her or himself. And so someone trained in internal family systems our parts work, could very well utilize that. In a way, I kind of do that. I come more from a psychodynamic model, but some similarities or overlaps of, object to object, or that kind of thing could be there. But there's also, there's more work coming out on IFS and addictions. There's a lot more stuff coming out. So I see that happening more in the future. But if that answers your question, Amanda, I think it's about finding the therapist in-house that has the IFS training. Okay. So here we have another question. I mentioned healing is about building behaviors. How do you decide which ones and whether they're effective? A sort of trial and error. Yeah, so healing is about behaving in healthy ways. Healing, healthy living, right? Healthy action. Usually you get some guidance from your therapist. The therapist will give you platforms or ideas to work off of. You practice those and you start to see what works for me, what doesn't work for me. Just because something worked for one client doesn't mean it's going to work for every client, right? So I would say, yeah, there is a bit of trial and error in it, but usually when you're getting it from a therapist, there's been more successes than failures, right? In respect to their clients that they've worked with. So I would put that to you as like, listen to your therapist, try to do what the therapist is guiding you to do, and you'll see some things start to take and some things won't. And that's okay. You just try new things if the stuff's not working. That would be my answer to that, Alex. It's good. It's a good session today. There's only three of you guys, but it's actually very good. Good questions, and appreciate that. If you don't have another question, I will maybe if you can type in an idea for a future talk, and I'll add it to my list of different things. If there's some particular kind of talk that you want to have in the future, I'll write that down. Oh, beautiful question, beautiful topic. I mean, okay. Yeah, so attachments, that's on my list. I don't have to write that down. I have it right here, addiction and attachments. And also I put emotions in hypotheses, in parentheses, because we often do an overlap of how the emotions take place in it as well. But absolutely. So I'll give you a very brief answer now just to whet your appetite on what the talk would look like. But in a nutshell, it's like this. Most people with addictions have an insecure attachment system. Most, if not all. The main secure attachment system has low anxiety and low avoidance. So people deal with their issues more personally and personably when they come up. When you have higher avoidance, you have a higher chance of addiction. Because rather than dealing with people and trusting and relying on people, you're turning to objects, you're turning to escape. So people with higher avoidance tend to have addictions. And another thing is higher anxiety, because you're coping, you're medicating your anxiety, can also lead to more addictions, but different types. So like I mentioned the umbrella there, the umbrella with all the different panels in it. People with higher anxiety can become more preoccupied with relationships and therefore be more relationship seeking, so like love addiction. And people who are more avoidant might pay for sex because they don't want the intimacy at all in connection with the person they're having sex with. So those would just be a quick, look into what that topic could entail, but it's a very good topic. Any other topics you guys might want to consider? Okay. Well, listen, you can write me anytime. I'll put my, let's see, I'll put everyone here. This is my email. I'm very bad at answering emails. It takes me a while. So just be aware of that if you write me. So this is my email, mbrowning.whitestone@gmail.com. Forgot the dot there. And another way to reach me is through the front desk, contact@whitestone.clinic. Okay, so those are two ways you can reach me if you guys have questions, or if you have topics you think would be great to have come up. Those are two ways to reach out. Okay. Okay. Well, listen, everybody, it was a pleasure having you here today. We have 15 minutes left, so I'll give you your last chance at a question. And if not, we'll wrap up. Okay. Here's a thanks. Okay, good. So guys, I'm going to close off. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. And I'm back here next week. Same Bat Cave, same Bat Channel, whatever that is for you guys. Old enough might know what that's about. But we'll see you next time. And you know, this is the same link, but I'll send a fresh link to anybody who's signed up in the course for the next lecture. Okay, the next talk. Thanks, guys. Have a good day. Bye.